I'm Becky Noble, and this is my revised informative speech for Communications 110 Public Speaking. And the topic of my speech today is a question that a lot of St. Louisans ask people when they are first meeting them. They might be new to town. And that question is, where did you go to high school? So, where did you go to high school? You know you're in St. Louis when somebody's going to ask you that question. I know I've heard that several other cities are kind of a little bit famous for doing it too, but I think in St. Louis here that we're probably the most famous for doing it, maybe because we do it the most. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for listening today. And like I said, you know you're in St. Louis when somebody asks the question, where did you go to high school? We ask that question for a lot of different reasons. We ask to find out if you grew up here in St. Louis. We ask it to find out maybe what part of town you're from. And a lot of times maybe we'll ask to see that if you did grow up here, that maybe you went to a rival high school of ours. And so that's a couple of the things that I'm going to talk about here is to find out the reason that we ask where did you go to high school is to find out if you grew up here, to find out what part of town you're from maybe, and to find out maybe if you went to a rival high school. And the thing about St. Louis is that we're a large metropolitan area, we're a large city, but we have a lot of small town things about us too. And maybe a lot of people who maybe come from a different city, that they might see that as a question when we would ask a question like where did you go to high school, that it is kind of a small town, has kind of a small town feel to it. But the reason that we would ask why did you go to high school, or where did you go to high school, is to find out if you grew up here in St. Louis. And a lot of times that question might have some socioeconomic reasons behind it, that we want to know maybe if you grew up maybe in a lower class, middle class, working class part of town versus maybe a more affluent suburb or something along those lines. So that kind of answers a second question for us too when we ask that. Also, St. Louis has a heavy Catholic population, and so we have a lot of Catholic elementary schools, Catholic high schools, Catholic colleges, but not only that, we also have a lot of Lutheran schools. There's Jewish schools as well. And so when we ask the question, where did you go to high school, a lot of times it will also answer the question, what religion are you? And you don't always have to be that religion to go to that school, but a lot of times people are. And so that kind of answers that question for us too. And it also, like I said, answers what part of town that you might be from. St. Louis and Baltimore, Maryland are the only two cities in this country where the city and the county are not one unit, that they're separate entities. And so we have St. Louis City and St. Louis County here. And so it also gives us a clue as to whether or not you grew up in St. Louis City or St. Louis County. And it might also, because St. Louis County has some great, really interesting, unique neighborhoods, but St. Louis City does as well. For instance, we have the Hill, which is very largely Italian, large Italian population that populated that area in the 1800s. We have Dogtown, which originally was a heavily Irish neighborhood, and maybe you even live downtown near the Arch or in one of the areas in downtown that's really getting revitalized and rehabilitated. So that kind of gives us a clue as to what part of town you might have grown up in. And we also asked that question to find out if maybe that you went to a rival high school of ours. There's some really great high school rivalries here in St. Louis, some probably maybe some pretty famous ones. And a lot of times if you have a friend or an acquaintance or a coworker that you find out went to a rival high school, well, that can be a lot of fun because you can give them some trouble about it, and you know, if they play each other and you hear about it later, you hear about a score or something, you know, it's kind of fun to needle them or do whatever. And so a lot of people have really good stories. Myself, for my own experience, I do have a friend who went to the rival high school of mine, and she was the maid of honor in my wedding. And during her speech at my wedding, she kind of gave a little dig to that fact that we both went to rival high schools, and kind of gave a little dig into my school is better than yours kind of thing. So it gives you an opportunity to really have some good and funny stories too surrounding that too, when you find out that somebody that you're acquainted with went to a rival high school of yours. So that's kind of a lot of, and we know a lot of those rivalries too, that they start in school but they go on throughout your life. They go on from your teen years, right on through your adult years. And so, like I said, you always get a good funny story out of that. But so just to kind of review a little bit, that the reason that most St. Louisans ask that question, where did you go to high school, is to find things out, to find out whether or not you're originally from St. Louis, or to find out what part of town that you might have grown up in, or to find out maybe if you went to a rival high school of yours. And that's always interesting to find out that maybe somebody that you know went to a rival high school and you really didn't know it, and so you learned something new about that person. But so that's pretty kind of why that we ask that question. And maybe it's not completely unique to St. Louis, but I think it's pretty unique to St. Louis. So if you're planning to visit St. Louis and somebody might just ask you where you went to high school, don't be surprised by that question, because it's just something they do. But if you're not from St. Louis and someone asks you that question, you might have a lot of fun when you give them a name of a school that nobody's ever heard of, and you get kind of a puzzled look from us when we kind of go, what? But that's my speech for today. That is why St. Louisans ask, where did you go to high school?